Hey guys, welcome back to Producer's Corner. This is Randy Younger, and today I am going to break down live drums versus programmed drums for you. So what I've done here is I've actually recorded a live drum track to a song that my co-writing partner and I are working on. We just tracked a lot of the guitars and did some of the mixing over the last couple of days of guitars and bass. And originally I had laid in some programmed drums using Stephen Slate drums, or Slate, what are they? Slate digital drum? No, Stephen Slate drums, and which I love, by the way. And I laid those in using Stephen Slate drums, and I was pretty happy with them. But I thought, it'd be really good to be able to do a kind of a shootout video showing some of the differences and the nuances between programmed versus live. Now, I will tell you that live takes a lot of work. Let me show you real quick what my setup is. Okay, I'm set up for live tracking drums today. This is my Ludwig kit that I'm going to be using for drums. I'm going to be controlling my DAW remotely from my MacBook. And so here's the kit. It is all mic'd up with a Shure mic drum pack. I'm not going to go into drum miking today. Just going to kind of, show you the kit. That snare right there is one of my coolest instruments of all time. It is one of a very rare, deep maple snares built for Buddy Rich, and very pricey, but very well worth it. It has a Dynasonic snare throw on it. And for those of you who know what that is, you can geek out about that, but it is really, really cool. Anyway, so this is the kit. I'm going to remotely trigger the DAW from there. I'm going to remotely trigger this DAW. And the DAW, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute out all the other tracks and just run a mixdown track and record with that so that there are no resources being heavily used. And I'm just going to trigger those live drums, and that's what I'll be doing. Okay, so now that you've seen kind of what I'm doing with the setup, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just kind of A-B some sections of these live versus programmed drums. So let's just dive right in. I will begin. Actually, I'm not going to tell you. Let's listen and see what it is. Okay, let's take that same exact section, play the other drums. So can you tell which are the live and which are the program? Probably you can. So if you guessed that the first one was live actual acoustic drums recorded, then you were right. And the second were the programmed drums using Stephen Slate drums. I will say that sonically, there isn't that much of a difference. There is a difference. I would say that the Slate snare is a little tighter, but my snare, I have it kind of dialed in exactly where I like it to be. Also, the Slate kicks are a little bit tighter. I have mine with a little bit more bass push on the end of the, the tap and the push part. I have a little bit more push on mine. But sonically, they're pretty close. I mean, if I really spent a good amount of time, I could dial them in and make them sound virtually the same. Close enough anyway. But I think you will tell a little bit stylistically. Let's go back through the first section with the live drums. the program drums. So I will say that the one thing I noticed right out of the gate is that the live drums are looser. They're a little bit more human. They're more fluid. There's more dynamics to them. Sometimes the grace notes on the snare are a little harder than at other times. Sometimes you can barely hear them at all, and they're just more like an idea. And with the program drums, they're going to be a little bit more robot-y, a little bit more sterile, a little bit more antiseptic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if I had played this track for you just like this, I don't think that you would have zeroed in necessarily on the drums and said, oh, those are completely fake. Again, let's try that section again with the live. So one thing on the live is there's more fill action, and I could have put fills in, which I really didn't do, because there's some things, it's interesting. Program drums can be a big time saver, but they can also really take a lot of time to craft to get them to feel right. And so recorded drums are easier to play in that all the things that you're going to do that are nuancy happen automatically, but it's a lot more difficult to set up, to mic them, the process. Let me just give you an idea. So mine are mic'd and ready to go all the time. But even from starting today around noon, I would say that I wasn't even close to this mix for about 3 hours. So it took about 3 hours just doing a few takes, going in and shifting some timing stuff around to tighten them up. And then probably 2 hours of going in and affecting and like here's the live kick setup. Oh, I gated it so that I cut out all the noise from the other instruments as much as possible. I put a pre-compressor EQ, post-compressor EQ, and then use this revival, which actually really, it's kind of an interesting, I want to say it's like an EQ, but it's not. It's just, it adds thickness and shimmer. That's what they say. It adds thickness and shimmer. And then it does that in a very effective way. So I really like to kind of just add that to flavor the thing up after I've kind of gone in and sculpted my EQs and developed my compression. And then I had a lot of variation on the kick, and a couple of the kicks really slammed hard. So I went ahead and put a limiter in there just to keep it from clipping. I didn't want any clipping. And I did the same thing on the snare too. The snare is a very similar setup, although this EQ is after the revival. So anyway, there's a lot that was going on to get the drums to sound like they sound. And, it was about a 2 or 3 hour kind of effort. And I tried to get them close to the slate drums. And by the way, on the slate drums, I also used some plugins to shape those things. So like I used the punchy rock kick settings for the virtual mix rack for the kick drum. And then I used the big snare settings on the virtual virtual mix rack on the snare. I put a little bit of verb just on the snare on the slate drums. Now I did that a little bit differently over here. Here I put it in line. Really shouldn't have done that. Was cheating and a little bit lazy. What I really normally will do is I create 3 buses. I have a overall drum compression bus, a snare or a drum, excuse me, 2 drum buses. One is a drum compression bus, and to create a kind of a glue effect, to really bring the drums together sonically. And then I have, so that's all my, I'm using the bus compressor from Slate Digital. And then I brought up just a little bit of the highs to let those cymbals kind of come through a little bit better, and the crack on the snare. And then I have a reverb bus for the drums that is just to bring the drums into a really nice space. Now I have a room here, but it's got one very specific kind of reverb constant. I wanted it a little bit more spacious, and so I have a drum reverb bus, but all of these are all running in parallel. And then I have a snare bus just to affect reverb on the snare alone. So all of these things are going out to their respective buses, and more than just the one bus if they need to. So they're all going to the compressor bus, they're all going to the reverb bus, and only the snare is going to the snare bus. So, and then of course I have the overheads treated. And my setup here is I have 7 mics set up. A mic on every drum, and then 2 overhead mics. And then I try to place my snare, or my overhead, my left overhead, more centered and focused on the hi-hat, so that I don't have to have a separate hi-hat microphone. Because there's going to be a lot of cymbals coming through. There's a lot of bleed coming from the snare mic into, the hi-hats going into the snare mic. So let's listen one more time. Here we go with live drums. And programmed. Okay, one thing you're going to notice too is that on the live drums, there's more sound coming at you in a unified way. In the program drums, every drum can be completely isolated and actually have 0 bleed from any other drum. And that's not really the way things are in the real world. There is nothing but bleed. I mean, you really got to work hard to manage bleed and gate your drums and make sure that you're not, like, excuse me, on my toms, I have a noise gate on those toms to completely kill any of the cymbal activity, any of the other drum activity, because I have them very closely mic'd. But I don't want all that extra cymbal stuff. It's coming from everywhere. I'm still getting bleed in the snare mic, bleed in the snare mic and the overhead. So I'm getting lots and lots of cymbals. So let's see. So you'll hear it a little bit more clarified. The instruments will have their own individual space more on the program drums. Live drums. So there you have some of the differences. I will tell you that over half of my pro mixes, we use either programmed drums or triggered replacement drums, where we would either trigger the kit with, like I have a Roland V drum kit and I can play the drums and then the MIDI information is captured and triggers those drums. Or we can actually go and do sound replacement on the live drums. If I just can't get the sound that I need, I'll go ahead and do sound replacement. Sometimes I'll go in, replace the kick drum, replace the snare, replace the toms, and sometimes I've even replaced 100% of everything, but using the performance from the live tracks. But I guess what I want to show you is that, you really don't have to have live drums to sell it. I think that the program drums can sell it, and you just have to do the work. You have to really take your time. And I programmed that groove because I'm a player and I knew exactly how I wanted it to be, but I could have drag and dropped MIDI files, MIDI grooves in and just, tried different grooves until I found something that worked. And Slate has hundreds of grooves that are tempo specific grooves and genre specific grooves that work great. So I will say this, I was going to do a drum shootout. I really don't need to do that. I mean, a drum plugin shootout. The fact of the matter is, I've got so many drum models, so many drum plugins, I always come back to Slate. And when I'm doing Slate, I should mention that I do route everything out as if it were live mic'd. So I'm going to mix all of the drums as if they were real and in an acoustic space. So Slate allows you to come in here and then send these out to outputs that can go into your DAW. And if you'll see here, here are the inputs that I have on the DAW from in the DAW from Slate. So anyway, let me know what you think. If you liked the program drums or the live drums better, I'd really like to know your opinion on that. But I do want to tell you that program drums can pull it off. I feel very good about them. And on this track, I'm still up in the air. I'm leaning a little bit towards using live drums, but I don't know. I might get down the way and go, they're just too much mushiness. They're just not clarified enough, in which case I'll either go in and trigger replace and use that performance, or just go ahead and use my my MIDI performance program drums. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful to you. I don't really know. I hope it is. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Please leave comments. I need to keep the dialogue going with you guys, okay? Thank you.